Next up, we've got Ian. So Ian Cook is with Birds Canada, and kind of popped up this spring that Birds Canada had got a little smash of money, and Ian was coming on with their team, and so I think got a really interesting perspective on how Ian is using the Canada Grasslands protocol to promote, some of the biodiversity side of the equation that Denise had already alluded to. So we asked Ian to join us today and provide his perspective on behalf of Birds Canada on what the supply side can deliver using the Grasslands protocol. So Ian, I believe you should have administrative function here if you want to share a screen, if you've got a slide deck, or totally up to you. Excellent.
And can you see, what can you see right now?
Yep, we can see your slide deck.
Okay.
So
I'll go to presentation mode.
That's a beautiful picture, Ian.
Yeah, one of my colleagues, Pete Davison, that's from the Matador Community Pasture. And yeah, so it's a beautiful picture. I use it all the time.
Perfect.
Right on. Thanks, Cedric. So yeah, just like you say, I'm here to kind of share a bit of a perspective from NGO side of things that's really focused on biodiversity, and my role as grassland conservation manager is really trying to preserve grasslands and the birds that use those habitats. And in terms of Birds Canada, our mission is to conserve the wild birds of Canada, and we do that through a number of different ways. But if we look at the groups of birds that are declining most heavily throughout Canada, those grassland birds have declined nearly 60% since 1970. Those are the ones that are unique and totally reliant on the North American grasslands, and aerial insectivores, which are things like swallows and nighthawks and that sort of thing, often use those prairie habitats and those grasslands as well. So these are the birds that are seeing the steepest declines, and which is why Birds Canada is so keenly interested both in the grasslands and in this grassland protocol, because habitat degradation and loss is the thing that is driving these losses for the most part. Like it's the biggest driver. And many of you will have seen these stats, but we've lost 75 to 90% of our native prairie in Canada. Where I am in Manitoba here, that's less than 1% of what used to remain. And according to the World Wildlife Federation's paw print report, if we look at the northern Great Plains, so the Canadian prairies, but also including some of those northern states like Montana and the Dakotas, we lose around 1 acre of grasslands on average every minute. So to look at that from a perspective of a grassland bird like a chestnut-collared longspur that's pictured there on the bottom right, they stake out about 1 to 2 acres on a grassland in order to raise their young and to feed. So they need that 1 to 2 acres in order to successfully raise their young. So if we're losing an acre every minute, then grassland birds like the chestnut-collared longspur or Sprague's pipit, or lots of them, are losing a potential home, fairly often, either 1 to 2 minutes. So that's a really big concern. And there are a number of things that are driving these habitat losses, but really the number one is that conversion to annual cropping in the bottom left, that oftentimes market drivers just make it more profitable to change those grasslands, even marginal grasslands, into annual cropping systems. So we really see this grassland protocol and this project that CFGA and partners Shell and Varesco and all the other partners are undertaking as a really important tool for grassland conservation, and thus for grassland bird and other prairie bird conservation. And this is done through a number of different ways, but I've kind of picked out kind of two of the overarching things that why we see this as such an important tool. And number one is that these carbon offsets represent an opportunity to have additional revenue streams going to those producers that are using grass-based production systems or engaged in grass-based production systems, and helping to keep those producers and those production systems more competitive so that they can compete and keep those pasture lands and those hay lands intact and help. So we see this as a way to really close that gap between the revenue that's gained from annual cropping systems and those grass-based and livestock production systems. And then the second thing that's really exciting as well from an NGO perspective is that this is a market-based solution, and that it's not, eventually when this gets going, it's not going to rely on those government funds or those NGO conservation funds, and it could add an influx of revenue and money into grassland conservation. And it's treating that carbon sequestration like another product that's coming off that farmer ranch. And by extension, what this does is that it starts to reward those people that, like Denise said, are already engaged in those types of systems and those conservation activities, and which is sometimes missing from the conservation community right now. So if we can find a way to reward those people that are already doing good things, that's a really good thing to be doing. So over the last little while, I think this report was produced last spring. Birds Canada undertook a producer survey towards their values towards grassland conservation and also species at risk. So getting a feel for what sort of values they have towards it, but also asking them what do they feel is missing from the conservation landscape right now, and what sort of programs they would like to see. And when we ask those questions, you can see that a voluntary carbon offset program rated the highest in overall interest. When we asked how interested would you be in participating in these different programs, that voluntary carbon offset program was the most, it had the highest interest. And 80% of our participants said that they would consider participating in that. So there's a lot of interest from the producer community in this, and probably speaking to those things that I was talking about in the previous slide, that it's going to have that additional revenue coming to the farm, and also that it's rewarding the production system that they're already engaged in. So because of this producer interest, and because of we see this as a really good tool, we decided to include it in our Grasslands Conservation Incentives Guide, which was produced in November. And this is a guide that's aiming at compiling the different incentives and funding sources that are available across the prairie provinces for producers to either preserve, enhance, or restore prairie habitats. And the idea behind this was to kind of put all these things into one place, so that producers had a one-stop shop to see what programs might fit their situation, and to engage that grassland and prairie habitat conservation. So we decided to include it in this guide, even though it's entering its pilot phase right now, and it's not going to go full scale for a little bit. But we really wanted to get producers familiar with this and get the word out there and start that communication about, and get some questions and answers and get them intrigued, because we think that this is a really important tool, and wanted producers to get their heads around this, so that when the time comes that it does go live, that they could start to take advantage of that right away. And then of course, obtaining an easement can take some time. So if anybody's thinking about putting an easement on anyways, well, maybe they could get the ball rolling and do that. And then just to finish off here, just some field experience and talking with some producers and some of the engagements that we've had, just some common questions that come up. These probably won't be that surprising, and probably some of them have already been asked today. But the number one question that comes up is, how much will it pay per acre? And of course, that, as Karen touched on, that's a bit of a nebulous topic, but certainly that's the main interest lots of times. The other one that I get a little bit is just how the administration will work and how producers will actually get paid. So looking at is that going to be a task that the producer will have to take on themselves, or is there going to be some sort of intermediary to do that, or a broker? So that's one of the questions that I get a little bit. And then the third question kind of represents more of the nitty-gritty details that producers want to ask. But one of the ones is, how long does it have to stay in grass? How long has it had to have been in grass, and all that sort of thing? So questions around that permanence, really. So that's really all that I had from our perspective. Again, we see it as a really exciting opportunity to really scale grassland conservation, and that's a really exciting thing from our perspective. If anybody has any questions or interest in downloading the guide, they can go to birdscanada.org/grasslands, or they can contact me directly and I can set them up with that. And I just want to say thank you to A&W and Environment and Climate Change Canada for being the funders for this incentives guide. Thank you very much.